is Pamela Afable, and today we will tackle about process-oriented learning competencies. So, process-oriented learning is a group or cluster of skills and abilities needed for a particular task, in which the teacher will act more like facilitators, scaffolding the student process of coming up with ideas and thinking about the process to bring out the best in each child. Information about outcome is of high importance where student end up matters greatly. To improve outcomes, we need to know about the student experience along the way. For example, you will give tasks to your learners like writing a poem or what. Then teachers will assess his or her student based on their skills acquired, and through rubrics, you will know the progress of your learners, and having a criteria, we can easily determine if they have improvement for that matters, because as is our student learning is so important, not only their outputs or products, but also the process of student efforts that lead to the particular outcomes. Assessment can help us understand which student learn best under what condition. With such knowledge comes the capacity to improve the whole of their learning. Assessment helps learners to motivate and see what they are aiming for and understand what they need to do to achieve those aims.
This chapter is concerned with process-oriented, performance-based assessment. So, assessment is not an end in itself, but a vehicle for educational improvement. Its effective practice then begins with and enacts a vision of the kinds of learning we most value for students and strive to help them achieve. Assessment is most effective when it reflects an understanding of learning as multidimensional, integrated, and revealed in performance over time. So, learning is a complex process. It entails not only what students know, but what they can do with what they know. It involves not only knowledge and abilities, but values, attitudes, and habits of mind that affect both academic success and performance beyond the classroom. Assessment should reflect this understanding by employing a diverse array of methods, including those that call for actual performance using that then over time, so as to reveal change, growth, and increasing degrees of integration. Such an approach aims for a more complete and accurate picture of learning.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, classmate. I'm JOAN GACHE for Group 3. My report is Learning Competencies.
Competencies are the main ideas or skills you expect a student to master. These are also called goals. We expect there to be 3 to 6 of these for each credit of hour of instruction.
Learning objectives and process-oriented performance-based assessment are state and direct observable behaviors of the students. When we say process-oriented performance-based assessment is concerned with the actual task performance rather than the output or product of an activity, or evaluates the actual task performance. Competencies are defined as group or cluster of skills and abilities needed for a particular task. An example of learning competencies for process-oriented is given below. Task is recite a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven. You can use these learning objectives to this task. The activity aims to enable the students to recite a poem entitled The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. First, recite the poem from memory without referring to notes. Second, use appropriate hand and body gestures in delivering the piece. Third, maintain eye contact with the audience while reciting the poem. Fourth, create the ambience of the poem through appropriate rising and falling intonation. The last is pronounce the words clearly and with proper diction.
Note: the specific objectives identified constitute the learning competencies.
As in the statement of objectives using Bloom's taxonomy, the specific objectives also range from the simple observable processes to more complex observable processes. For example, creating an ambience of the poem through appropriate rising and falling intonation.
A competency is said to be more complex when it consists of two or more skills.
There are the following competences for simple competences. First, speak with a well-modulated voice. Second, draw a straight line from one point to another point. The last, color a leaf with a green crayon. For the following more complex competences, recite a poem with feelings using appropriate voice, quality, facial expressions, and hand gestures. Second, construct an equilateral triangle given three non-collinear points. The last, draw and color a leaf with green crayon.
So good day everyone, so welcome to our blog. So I will discuss you the task designing under process-oriented performance-based assessment. So in task designing, learning tasks need to be carefully planned. In particularly, the teacher must ensure that the particular learning process to be observed contribute to the overall understanding of the subject of the course. Generally accepted for designing a task include: so first, identify an activity that would highlight the competencies to be evaluated. So it is important to identify the activity that is suitable to the learning competencies of the learner or the student. So example, reciting a poem, writing an essay, manipulating the microscope. So next is identifying an activity that would entail more or less the same set of competencies. If an activity would result into many possible competencies, then the teacher would have difficulty assessing the student's competency on the task. So it is important also to identify the activity for us as a teacher to identify the learning competencies of our students. So last, finding a task that would be interesting and enjoyable for the students. So it is important to find the task or activity that will catch the attention of the students so that they will not be boring. This is the example of task designing. We have here a topic and possible task design. So for example, in the topic, we put understanding biological diversity. In the possible task design, bring the students to the pond or creek. Ask them to find all living organisms near in the pond or creek. Bring them to the school playground to find as many living organisms they can find. After this, observe how the students will develop a system for finding such organism, classifying the organism, and concluding the differences in biological diversity of the two sites or in the topic.
Good day everyone, this is MJ Mirabueno. For this video, we're going to discuss about scoring rubrics. How does scoring rubrics works, how the scoring rubrics looks like, and how the scoring rubrics helps the teacher and the students. So let's start. Scoring rubrics. Rubrics is a scoring scale to assess student performance along a task-specific set of criteria. Authentic assessments typically are criterion referred measured, that is, a student's aptitude on the task is determined by matching the student's performance against a set of criteria to determine the degree to which the student's performance meets the criteria for the task. To measure a student's performance against a predetermined set of criteria, a rubric or scoring scale is typically created which contains the essential criteria for the task and appropriate levels of performance for each criterion. Each rubric has at least 2 levels of performance theory. Criteria, characteristics of good performance on a task are listed in left hand. Contains a mechanism for assigning a score to each project. So this is an example of recitation rubric. So as you can see, there is a criteria, the number of appropriate hand gestures, appropriate facial expression, voice inflection, incorporate proper ambience through fillings in the voice. So to rate them, so we have in the first column we have 1 to 4 if inappropriate facial expression. You can rate them 1 to 4 if lots of inappropriate facial expression. 5 to 9 if few inappropriate facial expression, and 10 to 12 no apparent inappropriate facial expression. So next we have voice inflection. You can rate them 1 to 4 if monotone voice used. 5 to 9 if can vary voice inflection with difficulty. 10 to 12 can easily vary voice inflection. And inappropriate proper ambience through fillings in the voice, you can rate them 1 to 4 if the recitation contains very little fillings, 5 to 9 if recitation has some fillings, and 10 to 12 recitation fully captured ambience through fillings in the voice. So that is recitation rubric. Next, we have rubrics descriptors. First, spell out what is expected of students at each level of performance for each criterion. Second, students more precisely what performance looks at each level and how their work may be distinguished from the work of others for each criterion. Third, help the teachers more precisely and consistently distinguish between students' work. Next, why in rubrics include levels of performance. First, clear expectation. It is very useful for the students and teacher if the criteria are identified and communicated prior to completion of the task. Students know what is expected of them and teachers know what to look for in students' performance. Similarly, students better understand with what good or bad performance on task looks like if levels of performance are identified, particularly if descriptors for each level are included. Rubrics are used to evaluate work and assign scores based on students' ability to meet expectation across a continuum of performance benchmarks. Rubrics were designed to be an answer to this problem for teachers and students. Next, we have more consistent and objective assessment. To a better communicating teacher expectation, levels of performance permit the students to more consistently and objectively distinguish between good and bad performance or mediocre and poor performance when evaluating students' work. Using a rubric when evaluating student writing will not only hold you accountable to remain objective, but will also clearly lay out expectation for students. It is best practice to introduce your students to rubrics early in the school year and remain consistent with their use. Third is better feedback. Identifying specific levels of students' performance allows the teacher to provide more detailed feedback to students. Another, teacher and students can more clearly recognize areas that need improvement. So, you should also consider if there are certain learning goals of assignment you wish to emphasize more than others. For example, if students have been working a lot in class on incorporating. So that ends my report. I hope you guys learned from me. Thank you.
Analytic versus holistic rubrics. For a particular task you assign students, do you want to be able to assess how will the students perform on each criterion? Or do you want to get a more global picture of the student's performance on the entire task? So, we must determine the type of rubrics you will choose to create or use. Is it analytic rubrics or holistic rubrics? Analytic rubric allows you to assess participants' achievements based on multiple criteria using a single rubric. You can assign different weights, value to different criteria, and include an overall achievement by totaling the criteria written in a table form. So most rubrics, like the recitation rubric, are in analytic rubrics. An analytic rubric articulates levels of performance for each criterion so the teacher can assess student performance on each criterion. Using the recitation or analytic rubric, a teacher could assess whether a student has done a poor, good, or excellent job of creating ambience and distinguish that from how well the students did on voice inflection. Advantage of analytic rubrics provide useful feedback on areas of strength and weakness. Criterion can be weighted to reflect the relative importance of each dimension.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, classmate. My topic is all about holistic rubric. A holistic rubric consists of a single scale with all criteria to be included in evaluation being considered together. With a holistic rubric, the rater assigns a single score. It is usually 1 to 4 or 1 to 6 point scale based on an overall judgment of a student work. So the differences of holistic and analytic rubrics. Holistic rubrics provide a single score to summarize a student's performance on a given task, whereas analytic rubrics provide several scores for tasks, one for each different category being evaluated. In contrast, a holistic rubric does not list separate levels of performance for each criterion. Instead, a holistic rubric across multiple criteria as a whole. So, when to choose holistic rubric and when may you use a holistic rubric? Holistic rubric tends to be used when a quick gross judgment needs to be made. If the assessment is a minor one, such a brief homework assignment, it may be sufficient to apply a holistic judgment to quickly review students' work.